When make-believe backfires in adulthood. Welcome. The jazz of psychology brings you a dose of psychology and everyday life mix with a twist in, blown out of proportion. The signs and tells of a weak mindset, overreaction. Now the thing we're about to discuss here is one of the differences between the weak and the strong mindsets. As the title of this post suggests, it has something to do with overreacting. Yes, overcomplicating things is another way to call this. Overthinking is similar, but slightly different. You know the thing the kids do? Use their imagination when they are bored? Like when they go for a walk on a rainy day and end up thinking of a puddle as an ocean. Imagination inspires creativity, so when kids do it, it's adorable. But what happens when adults do it? Well, let's take a look, shall we? No, we're not talking about adult creativity, just to clarify that part. We're talking about things getting out of hand, or in other words, blown out of proportion. The puddle equals ocean is an example of that, solely for the sake of the argument. Now then, making things seem more than they are is, unfortunately, a tendency shared by the weak mindset. Why? Because the weak mindset tends to get bored more easily. You would think that the simpler the mind, the easier it is to entertain it, right? Not exactly. The reason for it circles back to children. Anyone who has ever dealt with them knows that keeping children entertained is one of the most difficult jobs ever, because of their curiosity and usually short attention span. Because children take years to develop both, physically and mentally, they are easier influenced by their surroundings, which leads to them getting easily distracted and bored in their younger years. Now then, how people react to things is coded inside their minds. For example, one person can get anxious when seeing a roller coaster, while another one will get excited about it. The difference in reactions lies deep in their minds. If one sees the roller coaster as a threat, then, of course, they would fight against going onto the ride with all of their might. Whereas, another person will see it as something fun and might crawl out of their skin from the exciting anticipation of the thrilling ride. In both cases, it can be said that either one of them is overreacting, since it's just a ride anyways. However, whether we like to admit it or not, all of it circles back to psychology. It's all about perception. But perception gets distorted when there is not enough excitement for the weak mindset to enjoy. Due to its immaturity, the weak mindset subconsciously, bit by bit, begins to blow things out of proportion, trying to compensate for the lack of the thrill in life. That is when every boring puddle becomes an ocean, because the person has moved to a reality that is more pleasing for them than the real reality. This usually happens when a person's mind has too much free time on a daily basis, causing the person to overreact to even the tiniest of things, both positively and negatively. How can someone overreact in a positive way? A real-life case study will explain more in a second.
When things tend to get blown out of proportion, but are overlooked as a sign of a problem, because the emotions and gestures displayed are positive. Bad habits are not necessarily the typical ones like smoking or picking one's nose. People can develop all sorts of bad habits for no apparent reasons, one of which might be overreaction. Usually people tend to overreact only to bad things. A broken down car, a complaining neighbor, you name it. But it is possible to overreact in a positive way as well. For instance, when asked to sample a new meal, the person begins to compliment each bite on the plate with nothing but good words, while completely missing the point of the task at hand. Why is that? Because when a person lives in their own reality, they fail to interact with other realities, kind of like the multiverse. Now, the subject in question, in this example, was told, "Try this new dish I made and tell me how you like it or not." But what the person heard was, "You like it." When asking for an opinion, food being the case here, people try to find out what parts work for who and which do not. It's not necessarily offered with the intention of hearing only good feedback. However, the taste tester understood the question as an obligation to like it, because in their mind they think, saying something bad would be rude. Thus, they begin the rain of compliments without giving any real feedback of their preferences, unable to pay attention to the task at hand and using up all of the compliments on the appetizer, without leaving any for the rest of the meal, as the taste tester proceeds with it without mentioning a single word. therefore, missing the whole point of the meal that the feedback was eagerly awaited for the meal as a whole course. As a result, the compliments given, to put it drastically, served no real purpose, making the entire taste testing somewhat meaningless. Now, some might want to argue that perhaps the appetizer was the best part of the meal, hence why no other comments were mentioned, but then the question, why not say so? Because this is where we circle back to psychology. The taster lives in their own reality and judges other realities based on it. Saying something negative is forbidden in this reality. So only positive things are allowed. And if there aren't any, make them up. Which only turns that positive into a lie. However, doing so, the person inhibits themselves and their lives, because when the focus lies on the good things only, their social interactions become meaningless, as no real information is shared, most of the time. Now, usually it is not perceived as lying, but it can be considered to be borderline. Lying is a thought process that people choose to carry out willingly. It is fair to mention that positive overreactions are not always meant as lies, and sometimes people use them without being aware of doing so. However, in those cases the person is too far away in their fake reality, and it can be cause for concern. Nobody is saying that emotional reactions are a bad thing. However, there is a difference how a weak mindset reacts versus a strong mindset. The rain of compliments only happened because the weak mindset was too caught up in its own reality. Sadly, these lack of focus and misunderstandings tend to happen quite often with the weak mindset. This is the end of the case study.
Welcome back. Of course, it is only fair to mention that at times people tend to hide their real feelings by putting up cheerful personalities, but that is a story for another time. Right now, we'll circle back again. Because of the boredom of the mind, the weak mindset tends to turn even minor inconveniences into serious problems. As a result of that, they kick it up a notch each time, so when faced with a truly serious problem, they present it as the end of the world. Well, of course, because when you start with a golden bracelet as your gift, you can't really go back to a handmade paracord one. Even if the handmade one can be worth more than gold, considering how much time and effort was put into making it. Again, perception is the key word here. Anyways, back to psychology. The way people see things, most of the time are based on the things they learn, the experience, are taught by others, the knowledge, and their emotional intelligence, the maturity. In addition to those, at a slightly higher level, is observation of the world, the analysis, followed by the ability to tell differences apart, the selection. When a person lacks emotional maturity, they are unable to obtain the last two pieces of the puzzle, causing them to perceive almost every puddle as an ocean. No, this is not the same as anxiety. Anxiety is a whole different topic. Back to the point. Strong mindsets are able to differentiate between puddles and oceans. One has to be when dealing with a million problems a day. Without the ability to organize and prioritize, people drown in a vicious cycle of never-ending problems. Because every puddle is an ocean. In reality, sometimes a boring puddle is just that, a boring puddle, and there is nothing wrong with it. You have reached the end of this post. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for more, and remember, mental health is important too. Take care.